All right, welcome everybody. These are strange times. What's going on in Ukraine is disturbing. The threat of global thermonuclear war is disturbing. Lots of changes to think about. Luckily, well, there's no luckily. This is a horrible time. Yeah. So it does look like Ukraine and Russia are in negotiations on the Pripyat River today to end the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which is a good thing. I'm sure you've seen the news about this. Other things, it looks like, as you probably have seen from the guidance from the CDC on Friday, there's a new guidance which suggests that 70% of the counties in the United States are at a low or medium risk, and 30% are at a high risk right now. And this is based on intensive care, hospital beds, sort of dangerous COVID symptoms, things like that, being measured by the CDC. And we are right now in a medium threat, so I am going to no longer mandate that you wear masks in the class. I will ask you to wear masks, but and of course, if you're immunocompromised, you should recognize that a mask is important, and also that KN95 is important. The other guidance from CDC is that the KN95 does protect you if you're immunocompromised from others who have COVID, at a reasonable distance away. So the protection for you if you're immunocompromised is better. Anyways, what else? So for that reason, I think the plan right now, if we stay in the low and medium zone, is to move to in-person classes after spring break. I'm just hoping that spring break doesn't see chaos. Is there any way Twitch could still happen? I've also got, as you can see, I've figured out a way of showing simultaneously the questions and the PowerPoint. We'll see. I still find managing Twitch and managing everything else in the class to be a little bit chaotic, but it's possible that we'll have Twitch. But plan on this class being in person, and we'll see what happens during spring break. Will lectures still be recorded if we move entirely to in-class lectures? No, I'm afraid they won't. So notes will be more important in this class. I'm sorry to sort of change the direction of things as we move along, but I do think that, yes, and it's quite possible that spring break will cause a COVID spike. Let's say a week after spring break, just to make sure, and I'll just continue to try to do this on Twitch. Okay. Attendance policy will still be, the attendance policy will not change. I'll still be using Slido to ensure, to check attendance on you. And again, you've probably seen your attendance grades. Okay. You may well have seen, wow, okay. The exam grades should be posted on ELC. People have seen their exam grades? Yes? Okay. All right. Contact, yes, so those should be posted. We wrote extensive comments on them, as some of them were great, some of them were quite good, some of them were not so good. I hope that the comments I've written on them, we've written on your papers, your brief essays are helpful. Remember that the point of this exercise is not just for you to get an A in the class. I'd like everybody to get an A in the class, but also to sharpen your analytical argumentative skills, which are going to be crucial, and I think your superpower coming out of this class. I'm not going to answer when the next quiz is going to be, because those are pop quizzes. I can't see my individual. Okay. Email email the TA if you can't see your grade, but you should be able to see the grade in ELC. Oh, thank you. Go to assignments and then to see the individual grade. Thank you. Oops. Oh, I just deleted one by mistake. Okay. Ask that again if I missed it. Okay. Weirdness of Jeffersonian liberalism. Okay. All right. They are there. Look in tools assignments. All right. One last thing. I wrote a book this year. Started it about, well, parts of it I started about 18 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And I just got a review in the Wall Street Journal today, which is super exciting. So, thanks. It wasn't an entirely positive review, but there's no such thing as bad press. So, all right, I want to talk today about the two-party system. I want to talk today about the weirdness, as I call it, the weirdness of Jeffersonian liberalism. The term liberalism is very confusing, and I want to talk about sort of what it is and where it comes from. And yes, and again. Okay, first of all, the term Federalists is confusing. One of the things that Watson does is he uses Federalists with a lowercase f to mean the people who supported the Constitution, and Federalists with a capital F to mean the party. But just a kind of refresher course, in the context of the Constitution, the Federalists support the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists, like give me liberty or give me death. Why does my brain not work? Patrick Henry and others oppose the Constitution. Once the Constitution is finally passed, the Anti-Federalists go away as a party, as an organized group of people. Yes, individual meetings can be scheduled to go over the exam. Just email your TA. Will the lectures for this week still be on YouTube and Twitch? Absolutely. I will be posting those up until the exam. Oh, I've lost the... I've still got this problem of the overlay. Okay. The first party system then divides the parties, and the way that Watson divides them is slightly different than the way that I would divide them. Let's call the Federalists the Hamiltonian Federalists, since I tended to be people who were associated in one way or another with Alexander Hamilton. They included New England merchants, ship owners, and many sailors. Watson has this, suggests that the Federalists were mostly wealthy New Englanders, but that's actually not quite true. Particularly in New York, there are lots of working class people that are in the Federalist Party. New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania. Watson is a Southern historian, and so I think doesn't know a whole lot about that period, that area. But there are a lot of working class folks who are in the Federalist Party as well. The Jeffersonian Republicans, and this is also confusing, right? Because they call themselves the Republicans. They are created in a way at that botanizing excursion, remember, between Jefferson, Madison, and Chancellor Livingston, and it's New York large landowners and Southern farmers and Southern planters, large slave-owning planters. That said, George Washington is a Federalist. There are plenty of Virginia planters, Virginia slave owners, enslavers who are Federalists as well. So it's not a simple hard and fast distinction. It's not North versus South, really. But a lot of Jeffersonian Republicans tend to be landowners, but they also tend to be increasingly farmers. Their opponents call them Democrats, and Democrat is a curse word in the 1790s, right? People don't like that word. It refers to people who supported the French Revolution. People are likely to cut off the heads of their enemies, right? So to call someone a Democrat is fighting words, right? So we now think of Democrats as having, a different meaning. But at the time, the term Democrat was a term of abuse, really. Relatively few people called themselves Democrats. So we can call them the Democratic Republicans, we can call them the Republicans. Okay, and one of the things that divides or that helps to strengthen the Republican Party grows out of Thomas Jefferson's conflicts with the Eastern Virginia aristocrats who tended to be in the Anglican Church, associated with the Anglican Church. These were the British, supporters of the British. The College of William and Mary was filled with Anglican ministers who supported the British and were angry about the Revolution. Those Eastern planters, many of them first families of Virginia, supported the British side. And so the Democrats, or the Republicans rather, people like Jefferson, tended to be associated with those farmers in the backcountry who opposed organized religion, opposed having to pay taxes to support a church that they did not attend. On the left, you can see the Bethel Church in Caroline County, which is, as you see, very plain, very simple, no crosses, no ornamentation. That's what a Baptist and Methodist church look like. On the other side, on the East Coast, you see the Anglican Church, which was high church, which was, the minister in this pulpit that was 7 feet above the people who are surrounding him. This minister was a minister of the gospel. He was, in fact, was a bishop or was chosen by the bishop. So the tension between those two leads to Democratic Republicans to support separation of church and state. In South Carolina, you see divisions between Federalists and Republicans. We see a much more hierarchical society in those regions. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Okay, so what is liberalism in this context? What the weirdness of Jeffersonian liberalism. Liberalism, all the way up until 1940 or so, meant that you supported free trade, that you supported eliminating restrictions on people's ability to trade. It meant directly opposing things like the mercantile laws. It often meant opposing tariffs of any sort. Did you say the Jeffersonian Republicans were called Democrats? Yes. Which side supported the British? Neither the Federalists nor the Republicans supported the British. The Federalists, though, admired the British, if that makes sense. So they were not pro-British, but they admired the British, and they wanted the Bank of the United States to be like the Bank of England, if that makes sense, right? So they're not British themselves. Some of them might have been born in Britain, but they don't like the British. They're revolutionaries. They support the American Revolution, and they don't want to go back to Britain, but they nonetheless admire the British and want to pattern the United States on British institutions. The Republicans tended to be more French, tended to favor the French, tended to view, at least until the Terror in 1794, tended to view what was the revolution in France as being kind of comparable or related somehow to their support. So you saw, just like you see in many cases, kind of foreign policy shaping the political parties. In general, the Federalists tended to want to they didn't want to be British, but they tended to want to support an alliance with the British. The Democratic Republicans wanted an alliance with France, our ally during the war. But that's a great question, thank you. Okay. So this is what's happening as the French Revolution, the 1790s, is unfolding, is that wheat prices start to rise rapidly. They've been going up for a while, but starting in the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, and then through the Revolution, we start to see wheat prices skyrocket. In Jefferson's lifetime, cotton is valuable and wheat is not that valuable. Over his lifetime, what did I say? Cotton. In Jefferson's lifetime, tobacco was valuable. Wheat was not. Tobacco prices go down. Wheat prices go up, in part because there's war all over Europe, and flour barrels are extremely valuable. They go from being something like $10 a barrel in American dollars to $25 or $30 a barrel. This is a massive change. The flour mills in Richmond and in Baltimore are producing flour which are being exported around the world. The idea of liberalism, the central idea of liberalism, is associated with Adam Smith in his book, The Wealth of Nations. And that is the worst font ever. Give me a second. Switching back and forth between. Oops. Oh, I've got the wrong version of PowerPoint too, just to make things complicated. How about that? What are the principles behind Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations? This is a book that I think was extremely important to Jefferson and other Democrats. First of all, that there is an abstract market, that there's an abstract international market around the world. Market in the 18th century meant a place where you went to buy goods. Adam Smith is one of the first persons to talk about a kind of international market, a kind of abstract market in which all goods are being bought and sold over long distances. The percentage of goods that are being bought and sold is relatively small over large distances, but Adam Smith says that this market is crucial if you want to understand the wealth of nations. The premise, too, is that there's an order in these diverse transactions that take place between multiple nations, that a kind of invisible hand moves this and imposes order. The market itself imposes order and leads, for example, in the case of wheat, for enslavers to go from producing tobacco to freeing slaves and growing wheat instead. Wheat doesn't make a whole lot of sense to grow in a slave society. And so one of the things that is a kind of balm to people in Virginia, particularly people who are concerned, like George Mason, concerned about slavery, is that it's possible that the kind of this increasingly high value of wheat can lead to a different kind of society in Virginia, one that's not dependent on slavery. And so this idea that there's a kind of order in these diverse transactions that will lead people to produce the thing that's best suited to them is appealing. This idea of limited government, where governments can impose tariffs if they need to for revenue, but in general, try not to direct the economy. This makes sense in the context of the United States. The mercantile system prevented Americans from operating forges or paper mills or things like that. So this idea of limited government, that these transactions should be generally uncoerced, but also that people are bargainers. This is the central idea, that there's a kind of human nature that makes people bargainers. It has a kind of focus of a laser beam, that all that people care about in this sort of what becomes the sort of ideology of liberalism is how much they'll benefit by one action or another. that other things, religion, commerce, ideology, all these things don't matter nearly as much as a market does. Okay. So that's Jeffersonian liberalism. It's called economic liberalism. And it's got nothing to do with left-wing or right-wing politics especially. It's got everything to do with a kind of idea that the market is central. Okay, let's go back now to the Federalists again. In terms of Federalist ideology, and this is where, again, here where I differ from Watson a little bit, I think Federalist ideology is most important and most significant in the question of land, what it views in terms of land. That for Federalists, the point of selling land is to sell it in large chunks. Sorry, how is the order created is one of the questions, and can you explain abstract market again? Yeah, a market, we use the term when you say, what are oil prices? You say the market has made oil prices $3.50 a gallon, right? The market has done this, the market has done that. We're used to thinking about the market as a thing, right? People in the 1760s and 1750s didn't think of the market as a thing, they thought of it as a place, right? But now we're kind of, it's what's called reification, where we take something that happens and turn it into a kind of active person, right? And that's part of what economic liberalism is about, is there is this thing called the market, and the market tells us, with its signals of prices, what to do and what not to do. Does that make sense? So that's what I mean by the abstract market. A market is like this thing, it's like this being, it's like this creature that tells us to do this or that based on prices. How is the order created? And the order is created just by basically letting states throw things out at the market and not try to coerce transactions. And there will be a kind of invisible order that will creep up based on the market's activity itself. Okay, now to the Federalists. For them, the point of land, so land in the West is what Congress has. It's Congress's checkbook, right? The Western land is given to Congress. It's one of its sources of revenue. The other source of revenue is tariffs, taxes on goods coming in. You use revenue for land sales to build cities. So the point is to put order in chaos, to not just send farmers out willy-nilly all the way to the West, but to try to use land and land prices to build up cities. Democracy, as they see it, is dangerous. As I said, the term Democrat is a curse word in this period. Thank God for the British. These are not people who want to go back to Britain or want to stay in the British Empire, but they do believe, the Federalists, that regular trade with Britain is bound to help them. These are the people who passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, and the Alien and Sedition Acts are basically acts that say, that round up immigrants who are not fully American citizens, but most especially any criticism of the president, any criticism of Congress is likely to end you up in jail. The Sedition Acts did jail newspaper editors in 1798 and 1799. When the Republicans come to power, and this is an important change that doesn't ever get reversed, one of the things that Jefferson says is kind of declare a general, basically all the editors are set free. Almost all of the editors are Republicans, and through presidential action, through the Supreme Court, this principle is established that you can say or do anything, criticize any public character, and not end up in jail for it. And this is very different from Britain. This is very different from Europe. So censorship is to be eliminated. So the Federalists do support censorship. They believe that sedition is punishable by jail. The Republicans do not believe that. Oh, okay. Why didn't they want farmers to go west? How does building cities stop that? No, they did want farmers to go west, but they believed in an orderly progression to the west. in kind of measured regions. So you establish a city in Cleveland and you build farms around them. You don't just send people out into the frontier. You try to organize it with land companies. So you make land expensive so that the federal government can get money. And you let land companies emerge, wealthy capitalists who will buy the land in large quantities, and those wealthy capitalists will establish cities like Chicago, like Cleveland, like Cincinnati. Okay. So it's not that they didn't want farmers to go west, they wanted a more organized movement west, and they wanted those land prices for that reason to be high. They believed in the first Bank of the United States, and again, we talked about this before, but half of the credit in the Bank of the United States half of the lending in the first Bank of the United States was to the US government, and half went to merchants. Okay. The Jeffersonian Republicans believed in small land holdings, believed in cheap land in the West, believed in democracy for white guys. So on the one hand, they support widespread voting, only if you're white. Federalists, neither Federalists nor Republicans were comfortable with black people voting. Black people were voting in New York City, New York State, other states, but Republicans, believed that there should be no limits on who should vote, provided that they were white. They supported the French. They opposed the Alien and Sedition Acts. And so for me, the most important, or one of the important differences that actually brings Jefferson to power in 1800, the reason he wins in 1800, the reason the so-called revolution of 1800 happens, the first handover of political power from one party to another, the reason it happens is because of Jefferson's land policy. Not anything he says or does, but under Adams, you could buy 640 acres at a time at $2 an acre. There's a great deal of money, and very few people could afford to buy land under this system, and the Federalists thought that was a good thing. It meant that collectively, land would be bought in large quantities. And there were simple terms. You paid half in 30 days and the balance in a year. Jefferson, who's increasingly angry at the First Bank of the United States, sees it as a machine for the corruption of the legislature, creates a new system. And under Jefferson, his campaign promise is 320 acres. And rather than paying half, you could pay 1/4 in 30 days. And then a farmer could grow crops to pay for that land over the space of 4 years after that. Does that make sense? And then the election of 1804, his next policy is to break that in half, 160 acres. The same terms as above, with a discount for cash. And so if you pay with the notes of a bank, you pay the price, and it was usually a dollar an acre, I think, was the floor. What this does, if you look at this, paying 1/4 each year thereafter, in 1800 and 1804, does something that Jefferson is keen on, which is to break the power of the bank, so you don't have to go to a bank to get the money you need to buy land in the West. But in a way, it makes the U.S. Land Office a bank, right? It makes a lending bank, because you're buying this land, quote unquote buying this land, you're actually getting a patent to the land, and then you're paying it off in installments. That's a mortgage, right? The Land Office, the U.S. Land Office under Jefferson, becomes the largest bank in the world by 1800, in terms as a lending bank. Does that make sense? Because lending, effectively, the expectation is these people are going to pay off those loans. As we'll see, people's inability to pay off those loans to the Land Office are going to be responsible for most of our financial depressions and crashes through the 19th century. Do they want white women to vote? Relatively few people believe that white women should vote in this period. In the pressure for women's suffrage comes in the 1830s. There are people like Abigail Adams and others who believe that women's voices should be heard, but even Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, did not herself believe that white women should vote. What do I believe about land that differs from Watson? What I believe is that land is crucial to understanding the difference between the Federalists and the Democrats, and the Republicans. For Watson, the crucial difference is, he thinks that the Federalists believe in hierarchy and the Federalists tended to be support abolition, and the Federalists tended to be elites in the North. And, there's something to that. But I think it's somewhat overplayed. I mean, we now know that Hamilton himself owned enslaved people, right? So that Hamilton was not, he supported an organization that believed in sending enslaved people back to Africa, the Colonization Society. But he was not as strongly anti-slavery as it exists. It's only recently that we discovered these documents that show that Hamilton owned at least 10, perhaps a dozen enslaved people. So yeah, for him, it's about slavery and order and things like that. He sees the Republicans as being generally in support of westward migration. For me, the crucial issue was land prices. That's, I think, the thing that easily and simply divides the Federalists from the Democratic Republicans. Okay, all of this is transformed, this kind of land policy, the conflicts over land, 1790s, changes pretty drastically with what's called the Industrial Revolution in Britain, the ability to take cotton and turn it into cloth. And there's a series of technological changes that are taking place in Britain. Initially, what Britain is trying to do is to mechanize the production of wool. But over time, they discover that even cotton, which is much rangier and it's kind of stickier, there's a way of spinning cotton to make a very strong thread. It's possible to do this with devices like what's called the spinning jenny, the water frame. And over time, Britain's expansion comes with the export of cotton. It's cotton that is a kind of calling card for Britain, not cotton, but cloth. It's a calling card for Britain all over the world. It's helpful to understand that the British Empire is in part trying to break a kind of monopoly is too strong a word, but the power, the way in which India is capable of producing the most valuable cotton cloth from the 11th century to the 18th century, and Britain is furiously trying to emulate this carefully guarded secret for cloth production that exists in India. And over time, they're able to produce cotton cloth more cheaply, printed cotton cloth more cheaply than India does. And this is a crucial part of understanding how Britain becomes an empire, because it has cheap cloth which you can sell around the world. Remember I told you that a jacket, costs as much as a house in the 1780s and 1790s, all the way up until the 1820s. Clothing is incredibly expensive. Okay, most people in Europe had two sets of clothes, right? One that you used for church and when someone died, and another set that you wore every day, right? So clothing is very expensive. Cheap clothing is very important, and cheap cloth is what Britain is exporting. And it's with Eli Whitney that the cotton gin emerges. Eli Whitney initially goes down to South Carolina. He's supposed to be a tutor for a Yale graduate and a kind of an inventor and a tinkerer, and he's supposed to be hired to work as a tutor for a wealthy family. When he arrives, he discovers that nothing about this contract is going to work, and he starts to play around with the idea of a cotton gin, a cotton engine, which will take cotton and separate the seeds from the fluffy part of the cotton. So there's long staple cotton, which grows on the coast of Georgia and South Carolina. Long staple cotton is very long and thin. It grows in salty water, and it's not bad for very fine cloth, although it has to be mixed with wool or something like that to make it strong. Short staple cotton is the fat cotton ball that you've seen, right? When you go to it's a ball of cotton, but it's got at its base 15 to 20 little seeds, and separating the seeds from the cotton is really time consuming. Okay, so it can take basically 3 or 4 days to get a pound of cotton from 3 or 4 pounds of cotton, raw cotton. So to separate the seeds from that ball, the cotton balls, B-O-L-L, a cotton ball would be, a bunch of them would be set by the fireside, and children in the South, black and white, would be assigned to separating. This is the closest thing to a toy in the South, as you can imagine, if you can imagine, was to separate the seeds from the cotton, and it took a very long time to do it. What the cotton gin does is basically quasi-automate that by these little teeth scratch across the cotton itself and pull away in strands and tufts the white, soft part of the cotton, leaving behind a clump of seeds. That make sense? What the cotton gin does is radically transform the South. We go from a region in which slavery seems to be declining, in which Jefferson and others are confident that slavery as a system will go away in a few generations, to the United States becoming an adjunct to Britain's empire, an economic adjunct. The market, an international market for British cotton cloth, creates a demand for short staple cotton. And enslavers decide that the Western land, particularly though that's the Western land south of, say, I want to say Charlotte, North Carolina, is going to be planted in cotton. To grow cotton in this period, you have to have 200 frost-free days in a row to grow cotton. And so cotton can only be grown. Cotton is not a subtropical good like coffee or sugar. It's a little bit further north or south than that. And it's here that you see enslavers break up families and sell children down the river, literally down the Mississippi River, to new cotton plantations in Mississippi and Louisiana. We see large cotton plantations emerge in Georgia from the kind of the hearth where enslaved people are living, and primarily in Virginia and South Carolina. And so as the rice plantations international trade is hurting South Carolina rice plantations because it's cheaper to grow in China. What we see is enslavers who own many people, who have enslaved many people, breaking up families and selling those families to cotton lands in the West. And so Jeffersonian liberalism, to a certain extent, acts as a kind of justification. The market is a justification for expanding slavery across the Southwest. And so what we see is cotton production expand, particularly in areas called the Black Belt, which has nothing to do with black people, it has everything to do with black soil. And it's that black soil that goes from sort of Augusta through Macon and there to Mississippi. As you can see, there's almost no cotton grown in South Carolina except a few little pockets here and there, or relatively little. Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana become the major regions for cotton production. Okay. I want to conclude by saying that the weirdness of Jeffersonian liberalism is that it first acts as a kind of explanation or justification for the end of slavery. And George Mason and other enslavers free the people who had been their slaves. And we see a kind of burst of the end of slavery in Eastern Virginia. But by the 1790s, this British economic juggernaut that's connected to the cotton gin justifies the continued enslavement of people and their transportation down the river to the Mississippi. Was Eli Whitney a Jeffersonian liberal? No, he wasn't. And in fact, that's a great question. Eli Whitney was more of a Federalist, and he wanted a patent. He tried to establish a patent for his cotton gin. And the Jeffersonian liberals, by and large, said, well, once it's been discovered, it's free. I mean, they're the kind of first pirates, or first intellectual pirates of the late 18th century, and they quickly pirate his design. Whitney dies an embittered and almost poor man, because once the cotton gin is developed, many enslaved people who are carpenters and other people familiar with ironwork and things like that are able to reproduce this gin. How did the Jeffersonian ideology justify the expansion of slavery? The Jeffersonian ideology justifies the expansion of slavery in the sense that Jefferson himself and others did not especially want slavery to continue, but the growing value of cotton in the international market becomes a justification for the expansion of slavery. I want to talk about the thing that actually most helps Jefferson and most helps expansion across the West. But to do that, we have to talk about Saint-Domingue. We have to talk about the revolution in the region that will become Haiti. And we'll do that in the next class. Let me just see. Did the English also capitalize and know of the cotton gin? Yes, but it turns out that the U.S. becomes the kind of most important site for cotton production, in part because of roads. A couple of you asked about why roads are so important and why canals and things like that are so important. And it's the strength of those roads and canals that makes the United States much more powerful. I'd like now to do a quiz, since we have a few minutes. And I keep meaning to show this number, 2328138, but I'm not. Oh, we've got 5 minutes left. All right, I failed. We're going to do a quiz next class. I've only got 5 minutes left. There's not enough time for the DRC, folks. So we will have a quiz at the beginning of next class. I know this is supposed to be a pop quiz, but I apologize, but it'll be our next class. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.